Hello everyone and welcome to another news coolum video, I guess. Plug side chat, whatever. An update. I'm actually speaking to you from inside a new top secret technology. It's a plug-in. It's actually an extended range EV. Nobody's done this before. What are we, like 2010? Anyway, so I wanted to chat a little bit because a story broke from Inside EVs that, the new Chevrolet Bolt is here for a good time, but not here for a long time. And I have some issues with it, and maybe doing a little bit of fact checking, reality checking, whatever you want to call it. Because when I looked at that Inside EV's story and the headline, I immediately thought, oh, that's a very credible source that they cited. Trust me, bro. Have you ever heard of it? It's very, very trustworthy, very credible. Yeah, so essentially, I feel like this is a bit of confirmation bias because early on, when GM announced the new Chevrolet Bolt, and at the Bolt block party, a Chevrolet representative said, oh, this is a limited time or limited availability, right? What they were referring to specifically at that time was this special variation of the LT trim that's essentially a launch edition. I don't know that they've specifically used that terminology, but they've used launch edition to describe other early release versions of other models, right? So I'm just going to call it that. It's the Chevrolet Bolt Launch Edition. Like I said, it's sort of a gussied up LT with limited options. And that's the one that they're literally shipping to dealerships right now. And so when they said that, everybody jumped on and said, "Oh my God, they're canceling the Chevrolet Bolt already. It hasn't even been released yet, and it's not going to ship until next year because it's a 2027." Well, they were saying it's not going to ship until 2027 because it's a 2027 model year. So I feel like some of this is just a matter of confirmation bias by some of these anti-GM EV news outlets and feeling the need to justify their original take or original takes that all happened to be wrong. And I think this is also no exception to that. Now, I've given Autoline, I've given them a bit of grief before. I don't think that there's anything inherently anti-GM or anti-GM EV about them. I just think that sometimes they get their information from sources that I don't consider necessarily knowledgeable or credible, in particular like Monroe and Associates. So to Autoline's credit, though, they got this right, whereas what I'm seeing is a regurgitation from a bunch of other auto journals basically saying, no, the Chevrolet Bolt is only going to be produced for 18 months and then it is done. GM is canceling it. It is over. Well, at least Autoline got it right in the sense that when they talked to a GM representative, they said, if it's popular enough, we'll keep building it. And that is the key. They've always said that they are building to demand. Now, to be fair, 18 months is not that far off from what I thought would be the minimum run for the new Chevrolet Bolt, which is essentially 2 model years, right? I thought that would be the bare minimum run that they would do for this new Bolt. And again, I've got the receipts, right? So I don't know if you could see this, but yeah, this is me. This is I told them it was an advertising campaign. But what's important is this part right here. It's back by popular demand. And what are they saying there? They are saying that there was so much demand for a small format hatchback EV, efficient, cheap, easy to buy, easy to own, easy to live with, low cost of ownership. There was so much demand for it that they brought it back, but they couldn't bring it back with the old LG battery pack that it had in it, and they didn't want to release a system. You know, I talked about like the Global B or the GM VIP, all of the electrical and interconnected goodiness that comes with their new Ultium line of EVs. They couldn't release it without those things. So they did figure out a way to provide all of that internal communications and electronics while also bringing in a new battery pack that isn't their Ultium battery pack, but it's similar in energy and similar in price to their older LG battery pack. It happens to be an LFP. Some people have said, finally confirmed that it's CATL. I haven't seen that. Maybe that's in a Chinese language publication or something. I'm not sure. I haven't seen a confirmation either way about it. Really doesn't matter. What's important is that it's 65 kilowatt hours of LFP with a, well, apparently a true 2C plus charging rate, right? 10% to 80% in 26 minutes, all of the good stuff. And then along the way, again, GM did make other improvements. They also didn't outsource to LG for the motor. So they brought in a new variation of the Ultium motor that they were using in the Equinox, which, you know, I've also done a video on that. It's the silicon carbide inverter, much more efficient, potentially much more powerful, higher RPM, but also the lower reduction gearing, right? So you're looking at a similar top speed, but significantly more torque at the wheels, more efficient, all along the line. So there's a whole lot of improvements that they've done, but still maintained that original highly popular Chevrolet Bolt platform. So I'm kind of I'm kind of digressing a little bit too much, but suffice to say, it's popular, right? And they brought it back because it was popular. And outside of that launch edition, they were very clear that they said, hey, look, this is going to be a build to demand product. And I think we can't ignore that this is based on popularity. And if it remains popular, GM will continue to build it. And this is, I think, an important thing that we cannot forget is that GM didn't have to build the Bolt EV, or the new Bolt, I should say, because it's not like they're under any ZEV mandate, CARB mandate, you know, zero emission vehicle credits that they can, you know, CAFE standards. None of that is guiding this because they already have more than enough EV models that they are selling in more than enough volume that even if those requirements were still in place and being enforced by the current administration, they'd already met all of those quotas, all of those requirements. So this is purely a response to customer demand. And, you know, so other people have brought up a very good point. They're like, I don't even know why they're bringing back the Bolt, right? It's the delta between the Bolt and the Equinox EV just doesn't seem that significant. And I would say on paper, maybe not. I would say that there is a significant difference. Just the efficiency numbers that I'm seeing from Equinox EV owners, the charging rate that I'm seeing, the charging times and speeds that I'm seeing from Equinox EV owners who are going on trips. The new Chevrolet Bolt is already, at least on paper, far more capable. But it's also, again, smaller and it's much more efficient, and again, cheaper to own, cheaper to insure, cheaper upkeep, right? All of these cost of ownership. So all of these factors, and then of course, supporting new features like vehicle to home and whatnot. I'm sure all of the new Ultium products will have these same feature sets, but it's important to note that there's a high value here in the Bolt, the new Bolt, and even the most stripped down, lowest spec Equinox EV is thousands of dollars more than a top spec LT, and maybe it's a similar price to a fully loaded RS, right? Bolt RS. It's possible that it's maybe you could find a new Equinox EV that's completely stripped down, basic bare bones, that's even maybe slightly cheaper than, like I said, a full top spec, top of the line Bolt RS, but I doubt it. So that delta between the two vehicles might be more significant than people realize. I think just in terms of overall value, everything tips in favor of the new Bolt. And again, this is why I've also said that if I had to hazard a guess and predict, I would say that the new Bolt is going to outsell the Equinox EV by at least a factor of 2 to 1. It seems extreme, but I would say that if GM can keep up with the demand for the new Chevrolet Bolt, it will sell at a factor of 2 to 1 versus the Equinox EV. But that still gets us to this whole thing of the Fairfax assembly plant in Kansas, and oh my God, they're bringing the Envision back from China and they're building it here, and there's the Equinox Equinox that's being built there, and oh my goodness, there's no room for the Bolt. They're kicking it out, they're kicking it to the curb, they're canceling it because GM only loves gas vehicles and they hate EVs and they hate us, and they're going to cancel our favorite EV. So the problem with that is, outside of these stories that have been relayed, like I said, by Inside EVs, they claim to have an inside source that's feeding them this information. And then, like I said, there's a bunch of other news outlets that have just regurgitated Inside EVs as a trustworthy and reliable source when reporting on GM electric vehicle subjects, including GM Authority, funny enough. Oh yeah, we heard this from Inside EVs, so it must be true. Thanks, GM Authority. I don't know about that one. So here's why I have to question this assessment, analysis, if you will, interpretation maybe. Because like I said, it does feel a lot like confirmation bias for people who have an anti-GM EV bias. And that is that every other story that I've read about Fairfax Assembly Plant has always been additive, right? So we have a line at Fairfax Assembly Plant. We're going to build the Chevrolet Bolt EV, or we're going to build the Chevrolet Bolt on it. Cool. Oh, hey, look, we are adding a line to Fairfax Assembly Plant for the new Chevrolet Equinox gas version that we're going to be building. That's not replacing, that's adding. And then it's, because of tariffs, because of instability in the global markets, because we don't know what's going on with China, we're going to bring our production of the Buick Envision to the United States. And we're going to build it on the same line as the Equinox. Well, but if we added a line for the Equinox and the Envision is going to share a line with the Equinox, how does that in and of itself boot the Bolt production out of Fairfax? I mean, as it is, they're already only starting with one shift for the Chevrolet Bolt. So how are they booting one shift off of one line when they added a second line and are adding that new vehicle to that second line? See, none of this really makes sense on the surface when you look at it. And that 18-month out period happens to coincide with another story that we already know about, which is that the Spring Hill Ultium Cells LLC, they're adding an LFP line. That line is supposed to go into production toward the end of 2027. Well, that's weird. That's kind of like almost perfect timing for when they said that the Bolt would stop production. Now, again, right now, GM is outsourcing batteries, probably to CATL. We don't know how many batteries they have. We don't know what production it will support. But even if they somehow mirror CATL's LFP cells, which is not guaranteed, they would need to rework the pack in the Chevrolet Bolt at a bare minimum to accommodate those new cells. And we don't know if they're going to have the same C rate. We don't know if they're going to have the same energy. We don't know any other factors, right? All we know is that GM has been very clear that they are bringing their LFP cell production in-house. And that in-house LFP cell is going to be used eventually in the Chevrolet Bolt. So they're saying that Chevrolet Bolt is dead in 18 months. GM is saying we're starting our domestic in-house LFP production in 18 months. See how those two timelines coincide? So my interpretation, just based on my history of having to arch my eyebrow and scratch my head at some of Inside EV's takes when it comes to GM, is that they misheard a GM representative saying that we are going to refresh or pull. Maybe they did say we're going to pull the Chevrolet Bolt from production in 18 months. That doesn't mean that they're canceling it. Now, sure, they might want to open up space somewhere else. They might want to build it somewhere else. But to me, all of this is indicating that GM is still on the same course that they've always been on, that they are building to demand with this new Chevrolet Bolt, that they are planning to eventually bring the batteries in-house because it just makes more financial sense to do so, that they've updated and upgraded Fairfax to support multiple vehicles. Remember, this isn't the first time that GM has done multiple EVs, or multiple vehicles, I should say, on the same line. And in fact, the Bolt EV originally shared a production line with the Sonic. So you had an EV sharing a production line with a gas vehicle, right? So why are we automatically assuming that they would somehow need to completely halt production of one to make room for another, right? They appear to be able to operate far more dynamically in their factory setups and assembly lines and tooling and shifts, that I just don't see the need to cancel a product if it is popular. Again, they didn't have to build the Chevrolet Bolt, but they did. So it's a matter of we're winning over our customers. And I'll say this again, as long as China and their EVs are not really accessible to people in the United States, from what I've seen, this new Chevrolet Bolt is the closest a U.S. citizen in the United States is going to be able to come to buying a Chinese EV in the United States. It's very much equivalent in terms of capabilities, in terms of, like, even the design itself harkens more towards that sort of Asian preferences for smaller, more compact, more utilitarian, for densely populated, right? It's a car that frankly would sell extremely well in Europe if GM decided they wanted to sell the Bolt in Europe. Again, the format, the sizing, all of that, the LFP battery, the pricing, the capabilities, the hatchback, all of that just really aligns with the same sort of value proposition that you're getting from these Chinese EVs. The sizing, the safety of the LFP battery, the charging speeds even are more in line with what we're seeing out of these newer, faster charging Chinese EVs, right? Where we're talking about a 25-minute or so, 26-minute, 10 to 80% is pretty much a baseline standard. And this is, to me, signaling that GM has a serious competitive edge in the domestic market with this product specifically. And it's something that I think any company would be foolish to not leverage. And I think GM has been very clear about this. If it's popular, they're going to keep building it. If people want it, they're going to keep building it. And so at best, what I'm expecting right now is 18 months of full steam ahead, full production, as long as the economy doesn't completely quit on us, which is still a possibility. They're going to sell as many bolts as they can build. The demand is going to be high enough that they're going to say, yeah, we need to keep this going. We might need to add a second shift in Fairfax. We might need to see if we can push up our timetable to get LFP production going in Spring Hill. We might need to outsource more LFP batteries, possibly. I don't know what their supply chains currently look like, how many they ordered. And in 18 months, they say, well, hey, look, we brought the LFP in-house. We need to pull the bolt back for a refresh. Let's see what we can do with it. Let's put this new LFP battery in there, see if we can at least roughly match or maybe improve on either the energy, the range, the charging speed, whatnot. And we'll head into 2029 with a refreshed Chevrolet Bolt as part of their product line. Maybe it will be fully integrated into the Ultium system at that point. I don't know. But I mean, a lot of people right now are thinking there will be another even cheaper alternative to the Bolt, which is certainly possible, like a 6-module Ultium, like small hatchback. Maybe they bring back the Chevrolet Spark, just a Spark, not a Spark EV, just a Spark, right? Maybe that would be some, an around town 150, 200-mile EV that charges from 10% to 80% in 20 minutes. Sound familiar, Spark owners? Just a small, maybe a small, barely usable back seat, hatchback, cargo space in the rear. I could totally see them doing that. But again, think of it as additive, not replacement. Right now, everybody's talking about replacement. What are they replacing the Bolt with, right? If they brought it back due to popular demand, they're going to keep building it if there's demand for it. It's the same criticism I've always had. People said, well, why did you cancel the Chevrolet Volt? Well, did you buy one? If you didn't, well, then you really don't have, any place to complain about GM ending that program, because they tried and people just didn't buy it. And that's of course, that's a story for another day. And my fear for some of these other extended range EVs that are being pushed now by customers likely who have no intention of ever buying them. So, I would say caveat emptor, but maybe the the caution needs to be more on the side of the automakers and the manufacturers. Don't get fooled by customers who aren't actually interested in your product. So anyway, suffice to say that I think this is maybe much ado about nothing. Like I said, I think Autoline might have the better understanding of it, where, again, GM is telling you exactly what they're thinking, what they're planning, what they're doing, and there's really no reason to add a spin to it or interpret on top of it. They're going to build to demand. They brought the Chevrolet Bolt back because it was popular, and as long as it remains popular and as long as they can sell them, they're going to keep building them. They're going to keep selling them. There might be some breaks, there might be some pauses, there might be some refreshes or redesigns, but I don't see a cancellation for a car that really appeals to what I think most Americans and, like I said, a lot of Europeans and a lot of people in Asia would actually prefer in a car rather than these big, bulky, heavy, overpriced, overtuned, high performance EVs that are being sort of foisted on us with the cost that goes with it, right? So yeah, I think GM has a winner with the Bolt, and when you have a winner, there's no reason to, snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, right? There's no reason to cancel it. So I guess stay tuned. We'll see. And hopefully I can actually get my hands on one of these new Bolts in the wild without, a chaperone. And I can put it through its paces and see what it's actually capable of. So as always, thank you for watching.